terms of the stuff, deadlines remain changified, so exam 2, covering part 2, quizzes part 3, covering part 3, deadline April 5th, the end of day, so not this Friday, but next Friday. Exam 3, covering part 3, exam 4, covering part 4, and quizzes part 4, deadline April 26th, that end of day. And again, the reason why this is all sort of piled on here is because there's no more like month after this, because that's the end of classes. Exam 5, deadline's at the end of the normal final time, and to see if you need exam 5, I mentioned before, once you've done 4 exams, all the quizzes you used to do in the paper, look at your overall grade. If that's an A, you're done, because you can't get more A than A. If it's less than an A, you can look at the grade estimator, put in your overall quiz grade, paper grade, best 3 exams, hypothetical 100 for exam 5, see what that results. If that's a letter grade better than your real overall grade, taking the final could be worth it. And of course you can put in various numbers to see what you need, what would work, what wouldn't work. And if you don't take the final, again it's already scored as a 0, so there won't be any terrifying surprise where your grade suddenly like drops because it's already at a 0 now, so it can't get any more 0 than 0. Before pressing on to our new old stuff, or old new stuff, anything about any previous stuff or stuff to be that needs more stuff?
When we send the draft, is that online to you?
To me, then I'll mark it up and then get it back to you. Oh yes, for the paper, if you wish to do a draft, April 4th, you can drop it off in class during office hours, or it's not during office hours. I've got a drop-off and pickup envelope outside my office door. I check that every time I go to campus, and then if I find a drafter there, I'll drafticize it, put it in the pickup envelope for you. And I do type the comments, so if you're worried about my terrifyingly bad handwriting, it will be typed. Plus 5 deadline April 9th, emergency deadline April 16th, and desperation deadline April 26th. Also, and these are all end of day for the final versions on Blackboard. There's also on Blackboard a plagiarism checker, so if you're wondering about your paper, you can upload it to that, and you can upload it repeatedly, as many copies as you wish, and it doesn't get put into the system. So that way you wouldn't be getting 100% every time for having same or similar papers. Okay, anything else? Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Chisholm and the problem of the criterion. Now, the problem we're into is, as we've seen, is the battle between those who say, we know stuff, and the skeptics who say, you don't know stuff, maybe. So the challenge is this. Looked at commonsensically, we do realize that we believe things that we don't know. And of course, there are things that we don't know, but we don't know that we don't know them. And so we run into the classic problem of, when we're going through our collection of beliefs, how do we determine which ones are knowledge, so we should keep them, and which ones are not, so we should toss them. And so kind of the function of epistemology is answering that very basic question. You got a belief, should you keep it or reject it, or possibly suspend judgment? Now, Chisholm turns to a fellow named Cardinal Mercer. Not like Mercer, like the resistant bacteria, because that's terrible stuff, but Mercia spelled this way. Now, his contribution, the Cardinal's contribution, was this. He claims this thing called the mark of truth, which sounds, I guess, kind of cool, like a video game name or alternative band name. And he puts forth the following standards. And again, just because he's a cardinal, because he's dead, etc., doesn't mean you got to accept it. This is what he claims. If we have any way of sorting out the true from the false, he thinks if we have this standard, this criterion, it's got to have 3 qualities. First, it's got to be internal as opposed to external. It's got to be objective as opposed to subjective, and immediate as opposed to not immediate. Now again, just because he put forth these criteria doesn't mean that he's right. So Chisholm will have to give reasons why we should buy this. And this is what Chisholm works with. He thinks, bless you, we should go with this. So why by the three standards? Now, the first one, of course, is it's got to be internal. Why? Well, here he's taking a definite stand that could be seen as sort of philosophically political in a way, about whether you should accept the authority of others or just accept what's internal. Now, our good dead friend Descartes, he was one of the early thinkers to kind of make this shift from going from external authority, you have to go by what the authority of the church or Aristotle or somebody tells you, to having the authority within you. And so this standard, if you accept it, is that whatever rule of truth you accept, if it's provided by an external authority, that can be the ultimate standard. Now, a good question, of course, would be why? Because, again, just because you have someone who's like famous and dead and stuff, doesn't mean we should just buy what they say. Now, the argument for this, or the reason for this, is possibly pretty good, which is this. If an authority gives you the rule of truth, for example, use a medieval example, if the church says, this is the mark of truth, or if the state says, this is the mark of truth, or if Aristotle says, this is the mark of truth. Any doubt you have about the standards and the criteria would apply to that authority as well, because you can still raise the question, why should I accept that authority? Which is a reasonable point. So if a authority like the church or the state or Fox News or MSNBC tells you something, here's how you tell the truth, well, it's fair to ask, why should I believe those people? So that seems like a pretty good argument. So what Mercer and Chisholm conclude is this. You can't have certainty until you find within yourself this sufficient reason for accepting the testimony of such an authority. So Chisholm doesn't say, he's not going like anarchist mode where it's like reject all authority. What he's saying essentially is, before you can accept any authority, you already have to have your own inner standard of truth that allows you to tell true from not true. And then, once you establish that the authority is trustworthy, is right, then you could accept that authority. Now again, there are, of course, arguments against this. So just because, this was argued doesn't mean it's necessarily true. But that's what he claims. And again, it seems like at least decent logic. I can't know, for example, if Fox News or MSNBC has got it right until I know what right is. And then if I find out if they're getting it right, then I could trust them. Before going to the second condition, anything about condition one that needs more than one step. Second condition, objective as opposed to subjective. Now this may seem to clash with the first condition, namely it's got to be internal. Because we often tend to think, not incorrectly, that if it's just in our own mind, or it's in us, that must be by its very nature subjective. Because you usually think of subjective as, well, it's from my perspective as opposed to something objective. It's not from any particular perspective. But he thinks, of course, we can reconcile these. So how do we do it? Well, he kind of goes back to thinkers like our good dead friend John Locke and others who raised this problem. And we'll see this problem in more detail in the future. If we're believing something based on a subjective feeling or state, then we really can't trust that. He doesn't go into detail here about what Locke and others say about this, but it's kind of the idea. If we're kind of checking our claims, is this true or not, by kind of how we feel about it, that's not very trustworthy. For example, think about conspiracy theories. One of my favorite things. I love conspiracy theories. And for example, well, there's all kinds of. There's the one that 9/11 was an inside job. One of my favorites is that NASA faked the moon landings. There's all kinds of good reasons why they couldn't have done that. There are ones that, another one is that whenever there's like a mass shooting, it's actually all just faked. They have crisis actors and it's all, no one actually dies, it's all just faked. Now, if someone believes a conspiracy theory, or any theory for that matter, not just conspiracy theories, because it sort of feels true to them, it matches their worldview, and they feel that it's true, subjectively, that's not really a terribly good guide. And one way, sort of sarcastically, which may be kind of mean, is that I always ask people, well, can you kind of feel, based on your feels, to solve a math problem? Or use the feels to repair your car or your computer? And the obvious answer is no. You can't use the feels to solve a math problem, or fix your car or computer, or figure out the best way to repair a roof. You have to go by not the feels. And so if we go by just a subjective state, it feels true, you know, the gut, as people often say, then probably not going to work super well, or so it claims. Now again, there is an opposing viewpoint to this. There is the view that you can trust the feels. So how do we deal with the feels? Now Chisholm doesn't say stop the feels. He says this, which may be giving too much credit to humans, to us. He claims that we can reflect on our psychological states and control them to a degree. Now, Chisholm doesn't go into the depths of psychology about how things like, say, paranoia or schizophrenia or anxiety can affect people. Because clearly, if anyone's studied mental health, there are conditions where you just can't say, okay, I've got control. You know, it's often presented kind of in cartoon form. Like they'll have someone who's depressed or anxious, and someone says, can't you just stop being anxious or depressed? And they'll go to like another cartoon where someone's got like a broken leg. It's like, can you just not have a broken leg? And so we should consider here that the question of how much control do we actually have over that stuff. But it would be fair to say we do have some control. You know, we can be aware that we, for example, really want to believe in conspiracy theories that show people we don't like to be terrible. For example, there are all kinds of, for people on the right, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about George Soros and Hillary Clinton and so on. And people who hate those people, they want them to be true. Likewise, people who hate people like Donald Trump and George Bush want those conspiracy theories to be true. And so a person could say, okay, I really hate these people, I want it to be true, I need to like work through the hate. So what we should do is this. If we're believing something based on the feels, hate, desire, etc., and we haven't put the effort to kind of like push that aside, he makes the point that we really can't say that we're sure. Because if we're just doing it because we feel that it's true, feels right, then he argues, contends that we have no justification there. So he concludes, it can't be a subjective feeling. It's got to be something, well, he does kind of an odd thing, and I'll have to use bad drawings to illustrate it. Not bad in the sense that it can be fired, but in the sense that, you know, badly done. So kind of his deal is, you know, you've got the feels, these emotions, symbolized by just the heart, although it's, of course, in the brain. And if we are believing things or rejecting them based on subjective feelings, like we really hate Hillary Clinton or Trump, so we feel the conspiracy theory is true. He says, no, that's not going to work. What we have to do, according to him, is do this. We still need the feeling, but what we look at is what is causing that feeling. So, to use the example, like suppose someone again really hates Hillary Clinton, and they believe in the conspiracy theory against her because they really hate Hillary Clinton, and they feel that it's true. Now in that case, Chisholm would say, yeah, that's no good, too subjective. But what if a person then is aware of their feelings, they examine them, and they find out that objectively there's something causing it that causes them to feel that it's true, but there's an objective foundation to it. Chisholm in that case would say that's okay. Because it's not just, I accept it as true because I feel that it's true because I hate Hillary. It's that there's actually a foundation behind it, or so he claims. So far we've got the condition's got to be on the inside, so not it's true because authority says so. Secondly, it's got to be objective. You got to control the feels. Now he's also offering this as not just like abstract, stuff, but also as kind of practical advice. So if we're right-leaning politically and we're watching Fox News or listening to the president, we should consider this. Am I believing this because Fox News or MSNBC or the president says so, or do I actually have a standard I'm using? And then secondly, of course, am I accepting this just because of the feels, or is there something objective behind it? The third condition, with at least bullet points, is it's got to be immediate as opposed to non-immediate. Now this one is kind of stolen from our good dead friend Descartes. Descartes had the famous, cogito ergo sum, which should just be like cogito. That is, I think I am. And one of the problems that Descartes brought up is, if you're going through a series of steps, the evil demon can always get those claws in there and mess with them. And kind of the example I gave before, if you're working through a proof with multiple steps, you have to remember all the steps. And so if the demon messes with a step and makes you think you checked it, then it's going to screw it up. Or, to use an example from Rick and Morty, one of the episodes, there's like a alien parasite that makes you think it's one of your friends. And its weird trick is you remember an entire fake history of it being your friend.
Is that the one with the wedding?
Yeah, where you remember you think that it's been your friend all along. And so you have Mr. Unicorn Cat Man, and you think, oh yeah, this has always been here. This is great, this is fun. And so it's just deceiving you. So you think you have this long history, but no. So if you have to go through a series of steps, you can always be faked out. So what he does is what Descartes did, is say, well, you gotta have something that there's no room for fakery. I mean, for Descartes is, I think I am. So no matter what's going on, no matter how much I'm being screwed with, I still have to be existing to be messed with. And so Chisholm takes this and says, we've got to have a ground for accepting something that doesn't require anything else. So in his case, he does the infinite regress argument, namely, which we also saw in Descartes and elsewhere. If you believe this because of this, then of course you ask, well, why do you believe that? And what Descartes wanted was something you just know it's true. So there's no way to get the clause in. But if you have steps, you can always say, well, if I need B to know A, then what do I need to know B? Well, if I need C, what do I need to know C? Well, perhaps D, off to infinity. So he thinks that you need it to be internal, objective, immediate. So going back to our old terms, you would just somehow get the truth. You wouldn't have to go through steps. And again, this is nothing new here. We saw this in Descartes and Plato and other dead people. Before pressing on, anything about this slide? It needs more slidey stuff. We now turn to the analogy or the metaphor of the apple. And of course, no expense spared with the finest clip showing you believe a Randy Smith apple. Now Descartes' problem can be presented as the apple problem. And Descartes doesn't use this, but Chisholm recasts it as the apple problem. Maybe because he was doing it around lunchtime or just really likes apples, which are actually pretty good for you. Although, they have a high level of, contamination because, they spray stuff on it. Highest is the peach, because it's all fuzzy and stuff, but still delicious, and I guess worth the inevitable death. I still eat apples and peaches, even though I know that they're covered in terrible stuff. Now, the apple problem is this. We want to separate out our good apples from our bad apples. But you can also use the strawberry problem. If you ever brought strawberries, you probably know they go bad really quick, and if one gets all moldy and yucky, it quickly it spreads to the others, and all your strawberries are terrible. But we'll separate the apples. And he claims that bad apples tend to infect the good ones, making them bad. Not sure if that's entirely true, but the strawberry one's a good example. If you have like a fungus in your strawberries, you got to get that out of there quick, or all your strawberries will be terrible, and you'll be out that money. Now, even though Descartes didn't use the apple analogy, it's a good analogy to what he was trying to do. He believed that our beliefs were like this. And I'll use the strawberry one just because I like the strawberry one. So, if we have bad beliefs, they're like infected with the fungus of badness. And it will spread out and contaminate our good ones, and that will be bad. So what we need to do, and this is Descartes' program, is you need a sorter. And that's what he explicitly is doing. He's saying, I've had these beliefs, some turned out to be crap, and I want to get rid of them. So he needs a way of saying, crap, good, keep, garbage, toss. And we saw, in the 6 Meditations, how he grinds through all of that. So Chisholm agrees, yeah, we need this, we need some kind of system for doing this. We need some way to do it. Now Descartes' plan was this. If you could sort, it'd be like, again, you take your box of strawberries, you look at them, check them, and you see, there's one with all that fungus on there, that's going away. And the ones that are all damaged, etc., you sort them out. And what you're left with, if you do it right, is all good apples or strawberries, or in the case of beliefs, all good beliefs. And so metaphorically speaking, we have a sorting problem. How do we sort out the bad stuff from the good stuff? Now we saw how Descartes did it. So what's the problem? Why don't we have a solution? Well, Chisholm, of course, thinks he's got a solution, but clearly he doesn't, because otherwise we just feel like Chisholm solved it, epistemology is done, everybody gets the good grades. Now, here's why the problem stays a problem. In order to sort out apples or strawberries or beliefs, we got to have a standard. We got to have a way of knowing good, bad, ugly. Now, in the case of apples and strawberries, do we know how to do this? Or do people sit there baffled, staring at their strawberries, saying, oh, if I only knew bad strawberries? No, we know how to do this. In the case of strawberries, it's pretty obvious. If they're all covered in gray fungus stuff, then you've got a bad strawberry. Other things, though, of course, can be a little more difficult to sort out. Telling whether something's bad or not, not a visible signs. So in the case of apples, we know what we're doing. In the case of beliefs, though, we run into a problem. What's the problem? Well, according to Chisholm, up until he came along, we don't have any way of sorting them out. So, whereas in the case of the apples, we can go bad, good, strawberries, bad, good. In the case of beliefs, he claims we're kind of staring at them with our hands going like this, saying, I don't know, how do we tell? Because unfortunately, or fortunately, beliefs aren't covered with like gray fungus. You can't say, yeah, look at that yucky fungus-covered belief, that's got to go. So the question is, how do we tell the good from the bad? What's a proper method for deciding what's the good, what's the bad, what's the ugly? So we need to know which ones are genuine cases of knowledge, and which ones are not. And again, unfortunately, we don't have, like with apples. Like with an apple, we know what we're doing. You take an apple, it's solid, there's, worm-free, it's not all mushy, it doesn't get fungus and mold on it. Good apple. If you have one that's like you know, you touch it, your thumb sticks into it, and worms crawl in your hand, you're like, yeah, that is terrible. You know the bad apple. So how do we do the sorting for beliefs? Well, that's Chisholm's mission and objective. He wants to figure out the solution to the apple problem. Now, of course, he's not original with this because he attributes it to Descartes, and of course, it actually goes back further to anybody who's trying to say, how do we tell? But he's trying to solve this problem. Now, the problem, of course, leads to the classic circular regress or infinite regress of the skeptics. And once again, we have the no expense spared, the finest of Microsoft free clip art. Also Creative Commons, so super free. So what is it to be on the wheel? Well, here's our problem. Again, we've seen the skeptical problem before. We've got all these beliefs, metaphorically like our big barrel of apples. And we want to know which are good, which are bad, which are ugly. So on the face of it, we need a method of sorting. So we can go into our barrel and toss the bad ones into the compost and keep the good ones for consumption. Then the problem is, of course, we end up with like another problem. So kind of the first question is, how do we tell the good apples from the bad apples? Then the question is, sort of a step up, is a question about methods. Which method is good at sorting them? Now, looking at it like a technological problem, we can think of this in terms of, to use modern computer terms, or actually not so modern, the notion of the algorithm, not like the Al Gore, but the algorithm. And the idea is, what sort of rule set would we have to do sorting? So if we stick with the apple metaphor, we could say, we can imagine we're trying to develop a sorting robot where after the harvest, that it sorts through the apples, and it has a selection criteria, so it takes the bad ones, tosses them, and keeps the good ones. And of course, with any sorting algorithm, it's fair to ask, is that a good one? Is that giving us the results that we want? Now, of course, the double problem is this. Problem one is, how do you know the difference between the two? The good, the bad, the ugly. And then when you get your method, how do you tell which method is good at doing this? And of course, there's all kinds of ways things can be screwed up. It may be that when you're doing your sorting, that you don't get good results, you just get the results you've always gotten. A good example, as I mentioned, was how Amazon wanted to have a way of sorting out applicants, to get, so they would have to go through, narrow down to candidates that probably be interested in. And what they ran into was they used the standard of what they already had, so they ended up getting pretty much all met, pretty much in their results. So it'd be like if we had a bucket of apples and we just said, learn from this, and then the algorithm we had, or standard we had, gave us, still let the bad apples in, because it's like, well, I gave you what you already got. So you need to be able to tell them apart first before you can make your method. Or maybe you need to have a method before you can tell them apart. And we'll see how this works out or not. Now, one classic problem we run into, and this is on the method problem, is this. If we go with the method level, how do we tell good method from bad method? And to give a concrete example of this, imagine you have a startup company and you get contracted to develop a judge software, which is actually a thing. They have sensing software. There's one called Compass, used in Florida, of course, because Florida. And what it would do is they would just put in supposed information about a person, and it would give the judge information about how likely they are supposedly to commit a crime again and affected sentencing. So suppose you're hired to develop software for judging cases. And this is the thing, there's actually courts that are being turned over to Now again, we often have the sci-fi view that computers are objective and unfeeling, which is true. They don't feel, they're not biased, except for the biases we give them. So suppose, again, we're trying to develop a software, you get a startup, and you're trying to develop judging software. So what it'll do is it'll handle, say, small claims cases or, you know, traffic tickets cases, parking violations, etc. Well, to know if it's doing what it's supposed to, we need a method to tell if it's doing what it's supposed to. So we need a method to check our method. But then we need a method to check our method of checking our method, and we'd be off one of those terrible infinite regresses. So as a practical problem, you know, again, not an abstract problem at all. Again, imagine you're making a company that's going to do this. And Estonia is actually making a algorithm to handle small claims. You just put in information, the other person puts in their information, and then it gives a result. You just go online, settle cases. But of course, we have to know, is it giving us good results? Because we don't, if we're concerned about justice and fairness, we want to know, is this working? But no matter how many methods we have for testing our method, you can still ask, is our method any good? You know, our classic infinite regress. And again, this is more than an abstract problem. To give a concrete example, in Florida, of course, they had this program to guide judges in sentencing called Compass, and they found out it was no more accurate than just guessing. They could have just had, you know, they could have given each judge a quarter, you know, cost 1 quarter, or they could supply their own, you know, and you just flip it, and the results were, you know, just guessing, ended up with basically the same results. And so if we're going to spend like a lot of money on something, we want to see if it works, and also if we're going to be putting people in jail, for example, we want to see if it's doing the right thing. And we're turning more and more and more of our decision-making over to algorithms. And again, we have this view that computers are unfeeling and not biased, which is true. They don't have the feels. Your laptop doesn't get sad or angry. But if you put in algorithms that replicate, say, white nationalism, your computer is not really a white nationalist, but it acts just like one. And so we can bake into our algorithms all the biases, prejudices, and errors. So this problem in epistemology is more than just an abstract, what do I know, do I exist to trees think? It's who's going to prison because of this? Who's not getting loans because of these systems? And it's a fundamental problem in epistemology. How do we tell when we've got good systems? And right now they say, trust Zuckerberg, which is probably terrible. So we got to solve this problem. How do we avoid this infinite regress? And it's the wheel because, we get on there and it just keeps on spinning, staying on. I believe, standard is good because of this, but why is that good because of this, and so on. Rolling. Before moving on, anything about this, or this fine, high-quality graphic that needs more stuff? Maybe next year I'll upgrade to an actual animated GIF where it's actually rolling. Now Chisholm looks at trying to solve it by looking at what we actually do. Now this has, again, a very practical application. We're turning more and more and more of our decision making about big things. Again, not just things like, just minor stuff like what ads you see, which can be kind of important, but literally, sentencing people to prison, who gets loans, who gets jobs. And so we need some sort of system to sort this out. Now Chisholm says, we already know that we have ways of doing this, of sorting out reliable beliefs, good ones from bad ones. For example, the critical thinking class. You take a critical thinking class or sciencey classes, one thing the professor will always say is, if the selling point of critical thinking is use these methods, these procedures of good reasoning, science, logic, etc., you'll probably get to more truth than falsehood. It's a basic promise of logic and critical thinking and sciencey stuff. Follow these methods. I don't guarantee you'll always be right, but you'll get more good beliefs than bad ones. But then, of course, the skeptic will come along and say, whisper, but how do you know that the procedures of science and reason and common sense, how do you know this critical thinking are actually the best? How do you know they even work? Which is a fair point, because if we know that they work, it's because we know they work. And we know that they work because they seem to enable us to tell the good from the bad from the ugly. How do we know this? Well, we think we already know how to tell the difference between the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we put our faith in, well, not everybody, but some people, in science, logic, etc. So how does this point the way to a solution? Well, the skeptic, as we try to point that way, will leap in, hop up and say, wait. And they'll point out, what we're trying to do is sorting out the good from the bad. Going back to our concrete example. Suppose again you have a start, you graduate, you major in, say, criminal justice, computer science, double major, and you create a startup called Justice Machine, which sounds kind of cool. And what you're doing is developing software that is supposed to help take the burden off the legal system, where they can put in, data and make decisions about, or help guide judges in sentencing and reaching verdicts, etc. Now, of course, the practical problem there would be, how do we know that it's doing the right stuff? That if it's supposed to help with, say, judgment, that it's getting the guilty and not the innocent. Or if it's designed to help in sentencing, how do we know that it's doing the right kind of sentencing? We're not just making things, worse. Now, the skeptic, of course, would leap in and say, well, this is what you want. You said you're going to have a way to sort out, innocence from guilt, good sentences from bad sentences, and to do this, you apply all these standards from, justice and criminology and so forth. But how do you know that's the right way to do it? And in reply, you would say, well, I can see that the ones it picks are the good ones, or in this case, the bad ones for guilty sentences, and the ones it doesn't pick would be like the innocent ones, that it sorts properly, that the guilty end up being sentenced, the innocent don't. Now, the skeptic at this point would say, but if we can already see the difference, why do we need a general method for sorting them at all? Which is a good point, because if someone says, we have this algorithm that does this stuff, how do you know it works? Well, we already can easily tell who's guilty and who's not. And a sensible person would say, then why would we be paying you $100,000 a year for the contract for your software when we can just do it ourselves? Which would be a good question. Now, put more abstractly, the question would be, if we think up a method to sort stuff, and we can already sort stuff, there would really be no need to have the method. To use like a metaphor, suppose I already know how to the recipe for making bread. It would be odd for me to have the cookbook there, following the steps of the cookbook if I already know how to do it. And it wouldn't be necessarily stupid or anything, but it'd be kind of weird, because if I already know how to do it, I wouldn't need instructions to do it. So the skeptic hops in and says, in this case, hey, if you already know how to do this, you don't need a method. So, okay. And again, using a concrete example, if a company is reported to have software that sorts out the innocent from the guilty, and when asked how do you know it works, and they just say, well, we can easily tell, then the question would be, why pay for this software if we can already just do this? Okay, before pressing on to our next slide, anything about that stuff? We need more stuff. So Chisholm lays out two sets of questions, two each. Set A, what do we know? Which is a classic question of epistemology, which is a matter of the extent of our knowledge. The second question is, how do we decide whether we know or not? And this is the question about the standards or criteria of knowledge. So A is, what do we know? B is, what methods do we use to sort it out? Now Chisholm is going to use these two questions to frame the following discussion. Now, of course, one thing that people often miss out on is how you frame a question often affects the possible answers. So, for example, to use a non-epistemic one, if we say, how can we use prisons to better rehabilitate people? Well, that already bakes in the assumption we're going to keep using prisons. So it limits your options. So anytime you have a question, you have to ask a particular question, it always limits the possible answers. And that's kind of a practical problem, because if you have a question that's just infinitely open-ended, you just say something like, what? Why? Like, why, what, or what, why? So here's how he frames it. So when we're going forward, we need to keep in mind that he is sort of limiting the options by accepting these as the questions. And so you could debate whether these are the main ones or the only ones. Now the two questions relate to each other, because if we know the answer to set A, so you may be able to find an answer to the second, using the apple illustration, or we can go with the justice software, justice machine. If we already know, who's innocent and who's guilty, then we could explain to someone else how to do this. Now, moving away from the abstract, this is something we do like in normal life, like when you teach people how to do basic stuff. I mean, for example, think about how you learn to recognize bad milk. You may not remember like the exact experience you had, but you know how to do this. And someone, taught you at some point, here's how you tell bad milk. One thing is the smell test, and there's also the chunky test. If milk is chunky, then not good. So, if we can answer the first, namely if we know what's good and bad, then maybe we can explain a method of how we do this. Now, going back to the practical example of building algorithms, the idea would be is if we know how to sort stuff, then we can try to teach or design code that does this for us, does the sorting for us. And a good practical example of this, again, I mentioned before, was job applications. Suppose someday you have your own mega company, your own response to Amazon. And of course you need to hire people, you need to hire thousands of people. And if you have like good jobs, there's going to be thousands of people applying to your jobs. And you can't afford to hire hundreds and hundreds of people just to look through applications. You'd want to build a program that would sort them for you. And if you already know, what qualities you're looking for, the good employee from the bad employee, then you could, guide the creation of your algorithm to do the sorting for you. Practical epistemology. But suppose you don't have the answer to the first pair. Namely, you go in and you're like, I don't know what a good employee is and a bad employee is. I don't know how to sort these. Well, in that case, it would make sense to say that I couldn't, if I'm talking to like some programmers, and I say, I need a program that's, I got 1,000 people applying to my company, I need a program to sort them. And they say, so what are you looking for? And I say, I have no idea. They won't be able to really help me because, I need a program that no idea. That wouldn't be too useful. So if you don't answer the first one, namely if you can tell, going to the concrete example, good employee from bad employee, you might be able to help guide someone to creating a process for doing the sorting. If you don't know, then you probably can't, which makes sense. If I couldn't tell good apples from bad apples, I'd have no idea how to tell someone how to tell the difference. I'd be just like, I don't know. It's kind of like with those weird fruits, where they have like, you don't know, like is it supposed to be soft? Is it not supposed to be soft? I don't know what a good one is. And so if you don't know, there's no way to tell people like how to tell. Now the second pair, you might be able to go from the second back to the first. Namely, if you have a good set of directions, or in modern parlance, a good algorithm that tells you good from bad, then you can probably find a good one. So if you had, let's take a concrete example, practical. You're supposed to buy some exotic fruit at Publix, and you've never encountered them before. You're like, I have no idea what, red dragon fruit is, whatever that is. But you got a thing, that tells you what to look for. Now, if you have that, you have all the standards, it's like you pick it up, is it firm, but not too firm, but not too squishy, all these standards, then you'd be able to probably sort out the good from the bad, even if you have never encountered red dragon fruit before, which makes sense. If we do have a set of standards, we may not always be able to sort it out, but we could sort stuff. So it seems like you can go, from one to the other. Now, if we have no idea about directions, no method of sorting, then we wouldn't be able to answer the second pair. Again, going back to the examples of trying to find a good red dragon fruit, if you had no idea what's a good one, what's a bad one, you'd just be guessing. So you just throw one in the bag and buy it and hope for the best. So this all does seem reasonable. And again, even though Chisholm didn't, apply this like in this practical manner, this is today's, kind of core problem with algorithms. Namely, how are you going to approach it? Do you already know good and bad, and then you try to build a method, and how do you tell if your method's good? Or do you have a method, and then you try to use that to sort stuff and then check it that way? So which direction do you go? And this is one reason why the number one major for Silicon Valley startups is philosophy. Weird, but true. People who do all the coding and stuff, usually computer science. People who make all the money are philosophers. Only there, not here. Weird, but true. Also, the CIA apparently hires a lot of philosophers, because no one is more evil than a philosopher. That's because all the thinking stuff. Plus, you can break people down by just talking philosophy, but the terrorists just give up and just say, I confess, stop talking about epistemology. Now, Chisholm then goes to two groups of people. And philosophers, well, everybody likes to divide people up into groups. Patriot fans, heretics. Red Sox fans, more heretics. Democrats, Republicans, people like cats, people like dogs. So here's division R, or consists of the Particularists and the Methodists, not the Methodist Church. So you're thinking, what do the Methodists have to do with this? And the answer is not those Methodists. I think he probably picked that intentionally, just that's what passes for humor in philosophy. What Particularists do is this. They think they have an answer to the first set. Namely, they think they can already recognize, they know like some good apples and some bad apples. And they believe that from that answer, they can go from bottom up. Namely, okay, I know good apples, I know bad apples, so then I can build a method. Going back to our startup example, if you were starting up, justice machine, what you do is you'd say, well, we know some guilty people, innocent people, and I can tell them apart. So then I can figure out how I can get a method, an algorithm, a program for doing this. And that would be that approach, bottom-up approach. Or another example that doesn't involve putting people in prison, think about programming driverless cars. It's got to be able to figure out, like, good place to drive, bad place to drive, which usually involves, like, being on road, not being on sidewalk, running over pedestrians. And so we can already kind of do this, so we try to come up with a system so the car does that too. We want minimal running over pedestrians. Now the Methodists, again not for religion, they reverse this. They believe they have an answer to the second set, namely they've got the method, hence the name, and they believe from that they can go from their method to sorting stuff out. So they have a system for sorting, and they think that they can take that system and then go around applying it. So to use a traditional political metaphor, or we can use a political metaphor. One of the basic questions in political science is, how do you order society? Which is basically the pyramid problem. Every human society is always like a pyramid, which means there's a few people on top, and everyone else is working for the folks on top. And I always like to joke that Cheops built a pyramid to remind people that everything is terrible, because there's always some terrible people on top making the rest of us work for them. And so the pyramids, it's like a lesson in political philosophy. That's probably not true, but it's a good story. So one question is where should people go, like in society? Who are the people that should be on top? Who are the people that should be in the middle? Who should be the people that are on the bottom? And different political philosophies have different approaches. For example, white nationalists, white people up here, everyone else down here. People who believe in like a certain type of meritocracy would think that the people they think of as having merit should be here, other people down here. If you have a hereditary monarchy, people who are born to the right parents here, everyone else here. So you decide like where people go. Now one way to approach that is to have a existing political philosophy, like white nationalism, or fascism, or monarchism, or communism, or socialism. And if you have your pre-existing philosophy, what you do is you don't look at what society is, you have your ideas of how things should be, and then you take those ideas and try to make society match that. So what the white nationalists try to do is, put the white people up here, then get rid of everybody else type of deal. So depending on what you got for your theory, you're trying to make things match that. And that would be the top-down approach. Rather than looking at how things are and trying to build a theory, you have a theory and you're trying to make, divide things up that way. So if you're deciding who gets the top, you go by your theory. And you think those would be the right people there, because your theory says those are the right people. And in the case of the general epistemic one, it would be, I've got this theory, this method, that tells me which ones are good. That way I know which ones are good, because my theory says so. So you could make a pretty good case that, yeah, maybe if you get the answer to one, you could get the answer to the other. And if you don't have an answer, if you can't answer one, you probably can't answer the other, or so it comes. Before moving on, anything about that, or pyramids, I need more stuff. It's actually an interesting thing in political philosophy. One of the first lessons I learned was, I was looking at, maps of, basically maps of societies. I remember in class saying, hey, every society is a pyramid. The professor's like, yep, yes they are. And he also taught me that it's better to be here than here, which is totally true. So what's an example, who's an example of a Methodist in this system? Well, he picks our good dead friend, John Locke, the dead guy we saw before. And he thinks that Locke was a Methodist. Again, not in the religious sense, but in the epistemic sense. And we saw this when we looked at our good dead friend Locke. Locke said, here's how it works. Here's a person, here's their mind, and the way you determine whether a belief is probably true, something you know or not, is how you gut it. Namely, if it came in through the senses in the right way, then true, probably true. If it didn't, then probably not. So again, his approach is basically the empirical approach to knowledge. What do you know about what's out there? Well, it comes into the senses the right way. And Locke did, of course, acknowledge potential problems, things like hallucinations, perceptual errors, of other types, etc. But that's what he laid out. So Locke is going from, his system. How do you know if this particular belief is good? Locke says, well, was it formed in the right way? Did you get it from out there, through the senses, in the right method? Now, as Chisholm points out correctly, Locke really doesn't do the math, show his work, so to speak, onto why we should accept that. Going back to the metaphors about algorithms, it'd be like a software company comes up with a sentencing program, and they say, oh yeah, sentence goes through this correct process, you'll get the right sentencing for the person. But a good question to ask is, what's behind this? What's behind that process? Now, in terms of really applied epistemology, one thing we'll have to ask, more so in the future, as they say, is how do these decision-making systems, which we're relying on ever more heavily on, what is behind them? Again, we have kind of this sci-fi view that computers, they feel, they're not biased, they're objective, which is true. They don't feel, they don't hate, but we can build in all our biases and hatreds into their code. And so sorting out what they do is a practical problem in epistemology. We shouldn't put blind faith in it, because, as he points out in the case abstracted with Locke, unless we know how that system is making its decisions, we really have no way of properly judging. If it puts out, this person shouldn't get the money, or this person should get more jail time, we need to go and kind of look at what's behind it. And again, these are real consequences. They found out that the software they were using for sentencing, just guessing, worked just as well, which is not, because you can replace the software with a coin. Or the Amazon software that was supposed to rank people for the job applications was systematically excluding women, just dropping them out. Now Locke, again, is presenting an abstract view, namely empiricism, the idea that what you know about what's out there comes from the senses in here. But again, the problem is that you still have the other question, so why buy this? Which he doesn't really super well answer. Now, we also saw our good dead friend and shop dresser, David Hume, also an empiricist, and as we saw, he made the claim that empiricism gives us a way to sort things out. Now, Hume rather dramatically said you could go to a library and use his standard to decide which books to burn and which not. Now, Hume didn't actually advocate, doing the old Fahrenheit 451 Ray Bradbury deal, but he was being dramatic, saying this is how you sort stuff out. And what he claimed was this: if something doesn't contain just empirical standards. He says basically burn it. It's nothing but sophistry and delusion. And what he's doing is a dramatic way of saying basically he's got a method. Empiricism, and you can take that to the library to decide what to toss and what to keep. Now we saw where Hume ended up, which was at the bar under the table. So this empiricism of our good dead British friends is a form of Methodism. The idea is that it starts off with a standard. Going back to our political example, it'd be like approaching politics by saying, okay, we've got to have a pyramid, we got to put people in the pyramid. Or like, to use a sports analogy, it's like you got a bracket for perhaps for an event occurring in March, perhaps involving some sort of madness. You got to decide who gets in the brackets. Same problem. Who gets the bracket? Who gets in the pyramid? And if you approach it by saying, okay, we have these standards, and then you apply them to make the decisions about who gets in the bracket, who gets in the pyramid, and where, you're taking the approach of Methodism. You've got a method, and then I sort stuff. Now, Chisholm rejects empiricism, or argues against it. So how does he do it? Well, here's his argument. Again, the empiricists, as we saw with Locke and Hume, they say, well, you take the belief you got and you trace it back to where it came from. If it comes from out there through the senses in the right way, knowledge. If it doesn't, not knowledge. Chisholm's first objection. The criterion is, on one hand, extremely broad and far-reaching. But he claims, and this is the critical part, also completely arbitrary. Now, this is an objection that skeptics, we saw it back in the ancient days with skeptics. They said, well, if you come up with a standard, if you give a reason for it, infinite regress. I accept this because of this. Why do you accept that? Yeah, because of that. Why do you accept that? Because of this. Off to infinity and beyond. So you end up with that problem. Also, there is a problem with this broad generalization. Chisholm thinks it's really odd for them to begin so broadly, because they're empiricist. And what he sees as the particular problem is this. And again, he's basically repackaging that nasty regress problem. Because if you give a reason, you give a reason for your reasons and infinite regress. If you don't give any reasons, then you end up with no reasons. So if someone says, well, let's go back to our concrete example. Suppose you're kind of company like Amazon, they have their algorithm for sorting out employees, and they get, they keep getting just gods. That's all they get. It always spits out gods. And you ask them, what's your justification for this? And if they give you a reason, you can always ask, what's the justification for that, off to infinity? Now, if they say nothing, refuse to give any justification whatsoever, it's fair to you to say, you're giving no justification. Why should I accept this at all? And as the old skeptics pointed out, this is seems to be a fatal dilemma. If you give reasons, you're often infinite regress. Good luck with that. If you give no reasons, you give no reasons. Good luck with that. So either way, nothing but doom. So that's objection one. Old skepticism repacked. Before moving to our next exciting slide, anything about that needs more stuff? Objection two. Now, going back to our practical example of Amazon, or we can make up our own company. If you have a company that becomes like hugely successful, and you have thousands of people clamoring to be working for you, you've got to have a way to kind of sort through all that, because you don't want to be hiring thousands of people hire more people, because then you gotta figure out how do I hire my hirers, etc. You want a system to sort out people, so you can narrow down to a manageable number. Now, if we create a program that we put in the applications and we get it down to a manageable number, and then we find out, wait, we're getting a lot of bad results. Again, to use the example from Amazon, we just get just all men, just constant. I don't say that they're bad, but it's like, why are there no not men in the school? Or alternatively, we just get all women. We're like, why is it all women? Now, the problem he sees is this. In the case of empiricism specifically, to go with the analogy, if we have a system for sorting employees and it's getting like good and bad and mixed in there, then that's a problem. To use a more, I guess, concrete metaphor, if you've got a sorting robot that's supposed to keep the bad apples or the bad berries from getting packaged, and you check a package and it's like half bad berries and half good berries, you're like, oh, this is not working. This is terrible. So the problem that Chisholm says is this: when we use empiricism and apply it, we end up with a bucket of mixed. Again, using the metaphor of berries, you open up your belief berry container, and you find in there some good berries, but also some crappy, lousy berries. You don't want those. Now, Hume actually concedes this. If you recall back to me looking at our good friend David Hume, his end result is kind of like, just drink along, kind of the Rick solution to problems. So as we saw when Hume went through the skepticism regarding the senses, he ends up this. First, can you know if they're objects or not? And Hume says that's totally the wrong question to ask. Going back to my usual metaphor, it's like the monster in the closet. Hume would say, the question is not, what is the monster in the closet? The question is, why does little Billy or little Sally believe there's a monster in the closet? But he ends up essentially saying, yeah, you can't know if there's objects or not. You can't know, and we didn't look at his view of personal identity, but if you do the class in metaphysics or intro to philosophy, he argues that there's no way to know if you have a self. So you can't even know if you are or not. You can't know if there are other people or not. And you can't be sure whether there was anything in the past or anything now. You end up in like this, crazy skepticism with heavy drinking. So essentially, the sort of bite and gist of his objection is this. If we embrace empiricism and say, hey, let's plug in empiricism 2.0 into our sorting mechanism, and we'll run with that. So you get these experiences, chunk, process, grind, and it spits out results. But what Chisholm says is, well, let's look at what comes out in the basket at the end. He's like, oh, look at those terrible, awful, not true things. That's not working. So he says, that's not working. Which is, a good argument. Like going back to the berry sorter, if you're buying a berry sorter for your berry farm, and at the end, half the container is full of terrible, awful berries and half are good, that's not a system we want to buy. So he says, empiricism, basically, yuck. Bad berries, bad apples. So how is he going to get out of this bad berry, bad apple scenario? Well, he thinks he has a way out. And he turns to some other dead people. He was alive this time, so people who were dead when he was still alive. there's a fellow named Reed, totally dead now, and he was critical of Hume. Not as famous as Hume, because no. Now, at best, Hume said we can know this. There is a sensation here and now. We can't say whether it's an object or not. We can't even say whether we are experiencing it. All you can say is sensation here now. Now, Reed makes a sensible analogy. He says, suppose you're following directions, you want to get to like a inn or a hotel or wherever, and you're following the directions and follow the directions, and you end up in a pit. Literal, just a big hole in the ground. In that case, you don't have to be a genius to realize those directions were not any good because I ended up in a pit as opposed to where I was trying to get to. And that seems true. So basically saying metaphorically, Hume's directions lead us into the equivalent of a pit. So we know, even though we can't like lay out all the criticisms, we know something has gone wrong. So Reed, as Chisholm reads him, pun intended, he sees him as not being an empiricist and not a Methodist, but a particularist. Then he moves to a second thinker, a fellow named G. Moore, not to be confused with General Electric. Well, that would be kind of cool. Maybe that was his cool nickname because of all his lightning fast philosophy. Not true. He was a famous dead philosopher, probably less famous now. One thing that typically happens is if you're famous like now, usually like centuries later, not so much. For example, when Van Gogh was Van Goghing, he wasn't really famous at all. And there were other painters who were vastly more famous. And now Van Gogh's super famous, but the people who were famous then, not so much. Same often with like music and philosophers. So whoever's the top of the charts today, probably not so in a century or two. So to close, what argument is going on here? Well, suppose we go with Hume and we say, well, the only thing I can know is that here now sensation occurring. This sensation of as if there's a person there, as if there's a voice, but that's all I can say. That's all I can say. Now, Reed and Chisholm are going to say, well, that's just BS. We know better. So next time we'll look at why supposedly we know better. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you perhaps on the Thursday.